Well, good morning, good day to all, wherever you guys are listening in. This is the new series, the new health series, Stay Home, Stay Healthy. And yes, we're going to stay home and stay healthy. But today I have a wonderful guest, a good, extremely good friend of mine, Dr. Robert Cywes, a adult general surgeon. He's a pediatric surgeon. He's been doing surgery almost as long as the longest of them, over 20 years. And his medical training started off in Cape Town, South Africa. So you guys are not just going to enjoy wisdom and knowledge. You're going to enjoy a hell of an accent and a good-looking guy. And I'm proud to call him my friend, Robert Cywes. Rob, it's a great pleasure having you here.
Very much for having me on. And as you know, our relationship goes back to 2001 when you first came up from Mexico to train us fledgling bariatric surgeons in lap band technology. And we bonded right away, and we've been friends ever since. And I'm glad to say that we've been able to advance not just the operative skills and operative science, but also something that we were sorely lacking of in 2001, which is the understanding of obesity. As surgeons, we are the best that there is in the world at getting people to lose weight. Basically, whatever the operation is, band, bypass, sleeve, switch, now balloon, we can force people to stop eating. But the problem is that addresses the consequence of the problem, not the cause of the problem. And there is no surgery that effectively addresses the cause of obesity. And the problem is, as I said, we're so darn good at getting people to lose massive amounts of weight. I mean, I only start counting weight loss at 100 pounds, whereas diets and things start counting weight loss at 5 pounds. So
Wow.
The issue for us as surgeons is to really understand not how to make people lose weight, but how to sustain the changes that the surgery causes by really helping them to understand why they gained weight in the first place. And over the last 20 to 30 years as a personal journey and a journey with my own patients, we've explored that side of things. And I know a lot of people have barked up a variety of different trees, whether it's genetics or gut biome or a variety of other things. But really the constant is the behavioral aspect. And I can tell you absolutely that obesity is not a weight problem. It's not a calorie problem. It's not an overeating problem. It's not a nutrition problem. It is a substance abuse problem. And when you look at substance abuse, the consequence that we doctors have to deal with, whether it's liver failure or lung cancer or emphysema or obesity or type 2 diabetes, the result of the problem is really a consequence of the type of drug that people use to manage their emotional needs in a dysfunctional way. You can treat obesity all day long. You can treat lung cancer all day long. You can treat liver disease and DUIs all day long. But until you help the person to understand why they're an alcoholic, why they are smokers, and not why they became fat, but why they use sugar and starch exclusively in a chronic, excessive way to manage their emotional needs, only then can you begin to help them to treat their obesity as opposed to their excess weight. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, well, I got to tell you, you're a unique breed, let's call it, because as surgeons, as you were saying, we're not used to really treating a patient from a, let's say, mental aspect. We're used to treating surgically. We want to go in there, do what we got to do a 20, 30-minute procedure, see that those wounds heal, and send them back to their home, and that's it. We want to see them back again only if they're bringing somebody else as a referral, right? Uh, but it's rare to see someone that's taking the time. Again, as surgeons, our profile is generally one of, we want quick results. And it's rare to see somebody that, like you, that's interacting with the individual from a mental standpoint. You're individualizing the approach to treating a disease which is not even seen as a disease.
You're exactly right. And you know, the benefit of being a surgeon is that we do see rapid, massive weight loss. And I came into this when the band was in its early heyday. And you've been through the band, you were the most prolific band surgeon in North America. And as surgeons, we really struggle with failure. We struggle with complications and we struggle with failure. And if we're honest about it, the majority of surgeries long term fail. And they don't fail because the operation fails. But when somebody either develops malnutrition because they can't eat and they're not eating the right stuff, the little bit that they can eat, or they gain a significant amount of weight back, no matter how much you say, oh, well, you're going to have this operation and you're going to gain about 15 to 20% of your weight back, I consider that to be the pathway of failure. And the failure is incumbent upon us to understand that it's much, much more than surgery. You know, when you take a hot gallbladder out or an appendix out, or you do a surgery such as that, 100% of the care of that patient is in our hands. Their success or failure lies on in our technical skills, and all they have to do to show up. And as surgeons, it's very, very difficult to understand that when it comes to bariatrics and obesity and weight management, we have to partner with our patients. We provide them the operation, the restriction, or the malabsorption that allows for caloric deficiency. But we also have to help them to understand why they became fat in the first place. And the reason they gain weight later, and 85+% of patients that have bariatric surgery either gain their weight back, some or all of their weight back, or they develop malnutrition. And it doesn't happen right away. As you said, we see those patients for the first month or two to make sure they don't have complications, and then you've had your surgery, off you go. One of the values of the lap band surgery is that it still is the only surgery where we can intervene down the road with an adjustment. And what happened to me 20 years ago is that I was seeing patients back who lost a massive amount of weight, were well adjusted, but a year later, 2 years later, they were coming back in and they were insidiously gaining weight back. And when I fluoroed them, their band was fine, or they may even had an adjustment, and they still gained weight back. Or I'd see a person that came in with a bypass and now sleeves, they've gained their weight back. And yet the operation is sound, it's pristine. So I did my job as a surgeon, but I didn't do my job as a doctor. And what we found is that we are placing an obstruction in the way of people who love to use sugar and starch to manage their emotional needs, their anxiety, their stress, their depression, their anger, their fear, their frustration, their boredom, their pleasure. They've got one big club that they club that over their head with. And understanding their emotional needs is irrelevant. What they're looking for is instant gratification, no different than an alcoholic. And they may or may not pay the price on the back end. So when you do surgery, you radically reduce their caloric consumption. But then in the ensuing year or two, they figure out a way around that obstruction. Now they find if they juice their calories, if they're snacking again, the easiest way to beat any surgery is sloppy caloric snacks, particularly sloppy carbohydrate snacks. They're getting high, they're managing their stress with that drug, and they've bypassed the operation we've done. No matter how tight your sleeve is, no matter how effective your bypass is, they're going to die trying to beat that system. Or there are a small percentage of patients who understand the addictive nature of sugar and starch and transform their way of life. But the reason to exercise is not about losing weight. The surgery is doing that for you. The reason to be physically active is because it's an incredibly powerful alternative to carbohydrates as a way to manage your emotional needs. So what we have to help them to do is to understand that it's really not about calories. It's not about pounds. It's about substance abuse. And if you can't help them to deal with substance abuse and the pathways of the vulnerability to addictive behavior in their lives, you are not going to have a successful patient. I hope that
Wow,
makes sense to you.
it's okay. There's hundreds of thousands of people that have undergone weight loss surgery in the US and the rest of the world for that matter. And by the way, let me take this quick break and tell every viewer out there, if you're liking this subject, please don't keep it to yourself. Share it right now. Go ahead and share it with all your friends. Share this stream with Dr. Robert Cywes, an internationally renowned weight loss surgeon, who is talking about emotional needs, the emotional needs one has to satisfy the urge for carbs, for you were saying starches, and sometimes we don't treat that. We just treat this with surgery, but we don't treat the underlying problem. And you can call it a disease, you can call it a lifestyle, but it's very evident and it's there and it's rampant in our society.
You know, Ariel, you're absolutely right. And I think I'm remiss in, I'm so down the pathway of carbohydrate addiction. It is so obvious for me. And there is so much evidence to support this that I may be a little further down the field than a lot of people that are watching this. So let me roll this back, okay? And I'm going to give you an example of why I focus on carbohydrates. The way the human body works, we're going to talk about an analogy. We're not going to talk about obesity or food or anything or calories or anything like that. Let's use a simple analogy. The human body very, very tightly controls relationships with things that are vitally important to human beings. It's called homeostasis, and everything is controlled in a negative feedback pathway. So for example, when you're thirsty, nobody needs to know how much water to drink. It's crazy to think we should drink 64 ounces because we're all different and we're different at different times. The human body knows how much water you want to drink. You're thirsty, you begin to drink. At some point, a glass, 2 glasses, 3 glasses, a signal goes from your belly to your brain that says, dude, you're done, stop drinking. And we automatically stop drinking water. And there's no incentive to overdrink, so we don't drink water to excess, tightly controlled in a hormonal feedback pattern. However, when you and I go out and we have a couple of bottles of wine, while alcohol is a liquid that we drink, it is not essential for human survival. And therefore, the human body has no feedback control over alcohol. Passing out or puking is not feedback control, that's toxicity. And the reason we drink alcohol is not for hydration, it's for pleasure. So we can drink alcohol to excess. And if we do that over a protracted period of time, we lose control of that relationship, we're alcoholics. And the reason we drink alcohol is for the endorphin effect, for the way it makes us feel. Instant gratification, instant tranquility, instant relaxation, and we may or may not pay the price on the back end. Everybody understands alcoholism, and the way we treat alcoholism is through abstinence. Now, let's flip this around. I will tell you absolutely that it is impossible to get fat from eating food. Now, that doesn't make sense, but it's absolutely true. Because unless God and nature is trying to kill us off as a species, in fact, if that was true, they wouldn't have used COVID or coronavirus. But the bottom line is this, is that food has never killed us off as a species. And the reason for that is because our body has a series of negative feedback pathways in our belly, in our cells, in our brain, where the belly tells the brain that you've had enough. But that only applies to foodstuffs that are vital, essential for human survival. And there are 6 things that are essential for human survival: protein, fat, minerals, vitamins, trace elements, and water. Okay. What's not on that list?
Yeah, repeat that again.
Right.
Before
the only nutritional elements that are essential to human survival: protein, fat, trace elements, vitamins, minerals, and water. What is not on that list are carbohydrates. Now, it's a little bit difficult to understand for a lot of lay people in that carbohydrates are essential for life in our blood, but we don't need to put them in our face because our liver is extremely well prepared to produce sugar and glucose through a process called gluconeogenesis, or the conversion of amino acids and glycerol, part of fatty acid chains, into sugar. And it's regulated, that system is regulated by glucagon, cortisol, and insulin in a very, very fine interplay. So if you never, ever, ever put a carbohydrate in your face, you will be absolutely fine, except maybe in the first year or two of your life as a baby. For the rest of it, humans do not need carbohydrates. And because we don't need carbohydrates for survival, there is no negative feedback to the consumption of carbohydrates. So let me give you an example. You and I know we've done this before. We love steak. So let's say we go out and the waiter puts an 84-ounce ribeye steak in front of you. The cow sits down on your plate. How much can you eat? We have no idea, but we're hungry. So we start to eat. It might be 10 ounces, 20 ounces, 30 ounces. I don't know. But at some point, there's a particular chemical structure of that steak where as it goes through our intestine, it sends a very powerful signal to our brain. It says, dude, you're stuffed. You love that, but you are now full. And we down tools and we cannot eat more steak. But 2 minutes later, they bring out the ice cream, they bring out the cheesecake, or 10 minutes later, I'm at home with you and you break out the chips or the pretzels. We're not sitting there eating more steak because we can't. The body won't let you. But we absolutely can do something that's not a food, it's a drug, and that is consume sugar and starch well beyond we're feeling full. Those satiety signals can be overridden with sugar and starch. And if you progressively use sugar and starch like an alcoholic progressively uses alcohol to manage all of those emotional needs, and we ritualize the behavior of that consumption throughout the day on regular basis to manage that emotional needs, you're consuming the calories that are in carbohydrates and the sugar itself for your head, not your body. And therefore, excess is possible when you're eating carbohydrates. It is not possible when you're eating protein and fat, not to a point of harm. And that excess carbohydrate consumption causes harm. And the first bit of harm it does, the way the body protects itself as you begin to gain weight, is it protects itself by resisting the hormone that forces sugar into our cells. And that hormone is obviously insulin. So the first thing that happens in the human body is insulin resistance builds up, and your liver and other tissues become resistant to insulin. So now you need to produce more insulin to force the sugar into your tissues. And if you are a high insulin producer and you can produce a lot of insulin, you continue to force the liver to do its job, and those people get a fatty liver and they become enormous. They're obesogenic. They can produce a lot of sugar. A lot of insulin. But there are some people who can't produce a lot of insulin genetically. For example, a lot of the East Indian population and the Easterners, they genetically can't produce a lot of insulin. So as their liver becomes resistant to insulin, now they're not clearing that sugar from the bloodstream. Sugar builds up in their bloodstream. And over time, what does that cause? Type 2 diabetes. So the same drug can cause type 2 diabetes as can cause massive obesity. But the issue, the gateway is insulin. Just as, for example, if you smoke cigarettes, you may get emphysema, you may get lung cancer. But the cause is nicotine. And if you just treat the lung cancer and you don't get the guy to stop smoking, of course they're going to get into trouble again. If you just get a guy to drink less because he's had a DUI, you may solve the DUI problem, but you're not correcting his alcoholism. And yet what we do is we operate on patients to lose weight, but we don't address their out of control relationship with sugar and starch. And whether we do it as surgeons or we have a psychologist or a counselor in our office to do that, it is critically important for the long-term sustainable success of our patients to have somebody help them to manage their emotional needs in a different way. You see, we really can't help our patients. We can only really help them to help themselves. And we can help them to lose weight, but we can't help them to treat their obesity. And there's a lot of guys out there now saying, well, this lap band doesn't work, the sleeve doesn't work. So we're seeing those operations not working. So what do? We do massive operations to them. We basically sew their mouth to their arsehole and call it a duodenal switch so that every calorie that goes in their mouth, they poop out. Well, guess what? They become ridiculously skinny, which is great for a year or two. They've lost all their weight. Look, I'm famous. I'm a great doctor. But 5 years later, it's guys like me and you that are picking the pieces up of somebody who's a metabolic train wreck. Now they're profoundly malnourished and they're consuming more vitamins and minerals than they're consuming food. But they can't eat and they can't absorb anything. And every time they eat some fat, they poop their brains out. So what do? They start snacking on sloppy carbohydrates. And guess what? Despite the fact they have a duodenal switch, they look like Shar-Pei dogs. They're cannibalizing their own muscles as a source of protein because they're not able to absorb or eat enough. But they look okay because their skin is just hanging down. You know what a Shar-Pei dog is? It's those dogs from the East that have, so they are metabolic train wrecks, but we're proud of the fact that they're still skinny. Well, that's called comfortable starvation. We have not treated their obesity. So the role of surgery is as a tool to help patients along that journey. It should not be an alternative to them embarking on that journey. And that's a critical distinction. It's like
You know what?
antics for a smoker. Go ahead.
Uh, that's one of the things that I've always advocated for: the least amount of weight loss procedure for the best amount of weight loss. The biggest problem and misconception here, and by the way, let me start off with some stats. 82%, 88% of the US population is metabolically unfit, right? There's only 12% of the US population is actually metabolically fit, which means that we're going to talk about metabolism. It's not metabolism, it's metabolic disease. And it's all about high insulin. If your insulin is high, it's going to predispose to high blood sugar, high blood pressure, heart problems, even triple the probabilities of cancer. So only 12% of the US population is metabolically fit in a big study that was done a couple of years ago. Over 50% of the US population has heart disease, the adult population. And 52% of the US population is either pre-diabetic or diabetic. That means when you hear the word pre-diabetes, it's kind of like being kind of pregnant. Either you're diabetic or not. I think we are measuring the wrong things to determine diabetes. What I'm trying to say here is that even if you're not a patient, if you've not had weight loss surgery and you're actually sharing, please share this feed all around with your friends. Everybody can benefit from what we're talking about, because the reason we're doing this, stay home, stay healthy, you're in the worst environment with the least amount of access to good options to feed yourself and to feed your needs. What are your needs? You're going to be bored as hell these next number of weeks or months. And we're trying to give you a fighting chance. How? We're going to nurture your brain first so we can understand what the big problem here and what the big enemy here is. If you are on the other extreme end of things and you're already pre-diabetic or diabetic or have metabolic disease, high cholesterol, your excess weight or obese or heart problems, you can actually revert your disease with what we're going to tell you right now. So go ahead.
So I think one of just as a little background, we've been eating sugar for a long time. Yes, we've eaten carbohydrates as a species forever. But here's the difference. And I know I'm going to go down a road that I've always find funny, but if you go to the Amazon jungle, there are tribes in the Amazon jungle that chew cocoa leaves. Nothing bad happens to them. They don't turn blue and die. They chew cocoa leaves. It's part of their culture. It relaxes them. And also, because it's got some mild opioids in it, it is very effective if they hurt themselves for pain or whatever it is. But nothing bad comes from that relationship of cocoa leaves that they pluck off trees and chew. Now, if you go to the Amazon and you select those cocoa leaves and you concentrate them and you turn them into a white powder, whether that is heroin, whether that is cocaine, and you now bring that to the US and you sell it, you've taken something that has been in someone's pathway of existence for forever as a cocoa leaf that had benefits with very little liability, and you've super concentrated it, and now you've got people turning blue and dying of heroin addiction. Well, in exactly the same way, that is what's happened to our carbohydrates. The reason we are successful as a species is because we are omnicarnivores. We live best off animal products, but we can survive pretty darn well off plants. That's the human intestine, human evolution. However, the carbohydrates that we've been exposed to for the duration of our lives as a species have been fundamentally natural carbohydrates. Now, when I say natural carbohydrates, they have been uninterfered with by human beings until we started farming. And our human biology, our human genetics are still appropriate to the late hunter-gatherer, maybe early herder society. We certainly aren't genetically accomplished to handle what we grew as farmers. But we human beings were too smart for our own business. So what we did is we took grasses and we cultured them and cross-cultured them, and we came up with wheat and corn and grains. And we already started seeing in Egypt, where they had these cultures that were able to grow carbohydrates, that they were concentrating the carbohydrate in the food source. So it gave us dependable survivability, but along with it came the metabolic diseases that are now prevalent in our society. Then we went through the sugar era, and Christopher Columbus in large part is to blame for that, where we started concentrating sugar from cane sugar sources, and we've now become the manufacturers of sugar. So we've taken cocoa leaves, turned it into a heroin. We've taken basic roots and vegetables and rudimentary fruits, and we've taken an apple from being a little sour thing that we used to be able to eat for a month or two every year, and we've now concentrated into this huge big green or red thing that's chock-a-block full of sugar that's available to us 24/7, that's been completely genetically engineered. The problem with obesity is the equivalent to the problem with heroin addiction. We've over-manufactured and over-concentrated sugar in our diet. The difference is everybody knows that heroin's a problem. Most people don't understand that even so-called healthy carbohydrates are still forms of crystal meth. That apple that we buy is not an apple that God or nature developed for us. We have hybridized that apple. So when people say, oh, but that's garbage, it's not natural. You come with me to the jungles of Africa or to the savannas of Africa. Let's go dig up some roots and seeds, and then you'll see where our genetics currently is. We're way, way, way behind. We've advanced too far. So now we're fat and heavy, because the other problem that has happened, and it's not just our diet that makes us fat and heavy, because even though those foods are available, why are we eating them excessively? Well, the other thing that's happened is culturally, we have focused very heavily on productivity, and we haven't focused on ways to resolve the byproduct of activity, which is emotional distress. So more and more productive human beings, successful human beings, are building up all this emotional distress, anxiety, stress, fear, depression, anger, frustration, and we have no relief valve because we are not raised with that. What we're raised with is from the very, very first ages of birth, even before birth. Mothers are eating a bunch of M&Ms because they're stressed out. And then when baby's born, what do we put them on? Not breast milk, we put them on baby formula. That's a darn baby milkshake. It's a sugar-loaded baby milkshake. And then we wean them onto fruits and concentrated sugars in their vegetables. We don't give them meat. And then we give them Cheerios and we give them goldfish. We make them crackheads before they're 2 years old. And the fastest growing demographic of obesity in the United States of America are 2 to 5-year-old kids. The fastest growing demographic are 2 to 5-year-old children. So how the devil can you avoid being fat? So now this 300-pounder walks into my office and says, hey, doc, I'm fat, I've got to lose weight, and I'm diabetic, or I've got heart disease, or whatever it is. So, aha, I'm a surgeon, I've got the solution. Let's rearrange your intestines. And they magically lose 200 pounds. They magically lose 150 pounds. But guess what? Up here, they are still the same addict. And now what you've done to them is, and what I tell all my patients this is, on the day of your surgery, I'm going to kill your best friend. So they come out of the operating room, they've had the surgery, they can hardly eat, and their whole life was the consumption of carbohydrates. So what happens? They get profoundly depressed, they turn to alcohol, they start abusing opioids. You look at the gastric bypass population, how much they've abused the pain medication we've given them. They start drinking, they start smoking, they start using other drugs, or they figure out ways to go back to consuming carbohydrates. And what do we do as surgeons? Because we've done this ridiculous, well, not ridiculous, but we've done this incredibly tight, austere operation on them. We teach them how to fail. Oh, you've got to eat 6 to 8 small meals a day. We teach them how to puree their food. We teach them how to juice. We teach them how to liquidize their food. Oh, you've got to eat yogurt and you've got to eat the puddings. And yeah, stay away from Coke. But we teach them how to fail because we teach them how to eat through their surgery. The whole purpose of the surgery is to lose the weight. The whole purpose is early caloric reduction. And if they can't eat, that's okay. But we've also got to teach them how to develop better emotion management skills during the time that they can't eat. And the beauty about laparoscopy is those guys are up walking around within a day and they're able to exercise within 5 to 7 days of their surgery. The physical activity is not there for weight loss. It's there as an emotion management alternative. It's there to replace the best friend, carbohydrates, and snacking and eating and drinking that we surgeons have done to them. But it might be physical activity, something creative, something spiritual, something meditative, empathetic human connection. Those are the effective emotion management skill sets that we as a society have comprehensively lost. Why? Because they take time. They take time away from productivity. It takes time to go for a walk, but it takes 2 seconds to eat a tub of ice cream so that I can be more productive. And that's what we've become as a society. We've become a bunch of drug abusers because we're so focused on productivity. But it's tough to be productive when you're dead or you've had your stroke and you're half dead. So that's kind of our philosophy. And the beauty about the physician-supervised weight loss period that a lot of insurance companies enforce on us is not to get the patients to lose weight. That's crazy. That's what your surgery is going to do for them. Why have them lose weight before the surgery if they're having the surgery to lose weight? That's madness, okay? But the role of the physician-supervised weight loss is for them to progressively develop or work at the divorce from their best friend, to divorce carbohydrates progressively, learn to eat real food, and begin to do and practice a new emotion management skill set. And you don't have to be a dance psychologist to understand that, because it doesn't matter how long or how intense or how many calories you burn on the walk. What matters is the pride you feel after you've been for that walk. It's about emotional buoyancy. It's not about weight loss.
So over the years, we've learned how to treat from a holistic approach, holistically the patient, not just doing surgery. We now understand that even the preoperative phase where our patients lose weight has much to do, not just from a physical standpoint, from a psychological standpoint, and even metabolically, because I've seen over 50% of our diabetics arrive without any medications and normal blood sugars 3 weeks into their pre-surgical diet, before the surgery. And again, since we're being watched by a lot of folks online, I'm with Dr. Robert Cywes, and he's going to give us, I'm going to ask him the tips on how to survive this quarantine, this staying home, how to survive and not get overweight, obese, worsen our metabolic disease, or get it if you didn't have it. What have we learned over the years, and how can we apply it to people that are staying home?
I think that's a very, very important question. The first thing is this: if you have metabolic disease, particularly metabolic disease related to insulin resistance, and the metabolic diseases are obesity, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, hypertension, polycystic ovarian syndrome, inflammation, and all of those are critically important in terms of falling into that worst case scenario should you get COVID. Those are all the it's not about being obese. Obesity doesn't increase your risk of COVID. It's the thing that caused your obesity that causes intravascular inflammation, which is sugar and starch and insulin resistance. So the gatekeeper is insulin resistance. And one of the interesting things that you mentioned with a bypass, you can become non-diabetic. You can cure your or put your diabetes into remission within a few weeks of the surgery. But the INH put out a very interesting paper about a year ago, where 50% of the people that had gastric bypass for type 2 diabetes and it resolved have their type 2 diabetes back within 5 years. And they're not aware of it because they're skinny. So the first question is, do you have metabolic disease? And whether you're sure or not, just get on the scale or measure your blood sugar, or better still, check your insulin and your C-peptide, which are numbers that nobody ever looks at, because it's not about diabetes. Diabetes is just the number at which we doctors use a diagnosis to begin treatment. But if you're just below that threshold, you may not need medication for your diabetes, but your body is sure as hell suffering the consequences of chronic excessive carbohydrate consumption. So when we experience sudden, unexpected emotional upheaval, maybe the structure of our lives is damaged, all that kind of thing, which is clearly what COVID has done. Now we're on lockdown, we've got to work from home, all the stresses are there, and nobody's watching what we're doing. We do what we do best. And if you have metabolic syndrome, including obesity, I can pretty much guarantee you that you're finding ways to validate and justify and minimize and trivialize and rationalize having more and more treats, more and more little pleasant things to eat and drink, little snacks in your environment. A snack is always an emotional event. And you're not giving yourself a treat. You're giving yourself a little bit of diabetes or a little bit of obesity every time you put that candy in your mouth. So the first question you want to ask yourself, and there's 3 questions to understand what you're doing. Number 1, simply, don't eat or drink anything unless you absolutely know what the total carbohydrate content is. It's usually on the little box on the back, or you can Google it.
Yeah, and people don't look at labels, and that's incredible that you still find in most shopping, groceries, etc., all your products, it says low carb, low fat. I mean, it says low calorie, low fat, but it really never tells you in the front and if there's carbs or not. No added sugar. There's so many ways food industry is teasing you or playing with their words in order to get them to buy the product. If it's low fat, they got to substitute the fat with something. So they add sugar. Most processed stuff, even if it's low in sugar or low in carbs, still is processed. So it's going to go right through you, right to your bloodstream, and it's still going to cause the same problems that eating carbs is, which is insulin resistance.
Right, and I think if we approach it like an alcoholic, because if you're measuring the total carbohydrate content of everything you eat and drink, the next question I ask my patients is, what's healthier for you, a donut or an apple? And remember, these are my patients. They have obesity or diabetes as their diagnosis. And they're, apple's healthier for you. Yes, that may be true for a skinny, normal person. But I topped out at 300 pounds. For me as an obese person, for all my patients, that is not true because they failed to ask the first question. And if you look up the total carbohydrate content of the average apple, it's about 25 grams. And if you look up the average carbohydrate content of a donut, it's about 15 grams. So the reality is they're equally bad. Oh, but it's natural sugar. No, it's not. Sugar is a 6-sided carbon structure, whether it's glucose, galactose, or fructose, and it doesn't matter how it goes in your mouth. What matters is, as Ariel said, what goes in your bloodstream and what activates your insulin response. So additives do not make carbohydrates healthy. But the world out there loves to tell us apples are better than donuts. Your body doesn't care how it went in your face. So the first question is, know what percentage of your calories are carbohydrates. And for the average obese person, that is over 80% of your entire caloric load is usually a carbohydrate. And remember, carbohydrates exclusively go toward energy. Protein and fat can either be used structurally for muscles and hormones and enzymes, or they can be used for energy. Every cell membrane in your body has fat around it. Your brain is 65% fat. So a lot of the saturated fat that we eat is actually distributed toward nutrition, not toward the fuel tank of your body. Carbohydrates are excessive. So calories don't count for that reason because calories are not the same. Okay? The second question you want to ask yourself, how often are you eating? And remember, a snack is always an emotional event. So I don't care if it's one M&M, one sip of Coke, one peanut, a whole tub of ice cream, a whole steak, a whole bowl of vegetables. Every time you eat, that is a meal. And human beings, we're a little bit like dogs. We're designed to eat once or twice a day. So anything outside of 1 or 2 meals a day is in excess of what your body needs. Now, why do they tell us, oh, you've got to eat 6 small meals a day, even if you haven't had surgery? The reason for that is because if you're eating the standard American diet, your blood sugar is going up, insulin is dropping it down, and the whole day your blood sugar is going up and down. And every time your blood sugar goes down, I'm hungry. Okay, so the first thing is there's a physiologic response to overeat in terms of frequency. But the second thing is this: when people, oh, you should only eat when you're hungry. Well, how often does a smoker want a cigarette? All the time. How often does a fat person want to eat? All the time. We're hungry all the time because hunger is an emotional event. It is not a nutritional event. And believe me, I live that life. So don't only eat when you're hungry. It needs to become a structured, pre-planned, preordained way. If you've got a dog, you feed your dog twice a day. Well, some of us are more dog-like than others, but look at how often you're putting calories in your mouth, irrespective of the source. And I bet you the pattern is more closely related to smoking than it is to nutritional eating. And remember, obesity is not just about what you eat. That's where the keto people or the carnivore people or the diet people get it wrong. Obesity is as much about how you eat and why you eat as it is about what you eat. So the third question, every time you're about to put calories in your face, ask yourself why. Why am I doing this right now? I've just had dinner. Why am I sitting in front of the TV with a bag of chips? Okay. I've just had dinner. Why am I eating dessert? I'm about to have dinner. Why am I snacking on this thing? Why am I standing in front of the fridge right now? And almost always, if you step back from the fridge and ask yourself that question, there is always an emotional trigger that you are oblivious to because all you want right now is resolution. So once you quantify those three questions and you realize, wow, I didn't realize how bad this was. I call that the elephant. The elephant is enormous. And you don't realize that until you've answered those three questions for a couple of days. And then the next question is, how do you eat an elephant? You cannot eat an elephant in one bite. The way we do it is to break it up into little bites. So you cannot solve the problem of obesity with one surgery or by just giving up carbohydrates. Yes, you can quit drinking alcohol, you can quit smoking, you can quit eating carbohydrates on any given day. But it takes the rest of your life until 10 minutes after you're dead, to rebuild a more effective effort-based emotion management system to replace the role that the drug had in the beginning. And one of the key things, when you talk about alcoholism, nobody tells the alcoholic what they should drink. We just tell them you don't have to drink alcohol. Nobody tells them about what type of water is the best water to drink. Nobody tells a smoker about what air quality they should breathe. It's about quitting smoking. And yet we love to tell fat people evangelically about what the best thing is to eat. The reality is this: it doesn't matter what the hell you eat as long as it doesn't contain carbohydrates. If you want to be more vegetarian, if you want to be more carnivore, I don't care. It's the sugar and the starch that is the problem. We can argue about what's best to eat, but that ultimately is it.
Let me interrupt you for a second. So
yeah,
one of the important things that we're talking about here is not just surgery for obesity. We're going away from that because we're actually talking about everybody. Most everybody, 9 out of 10 people have some type of metabolic problem in the United States. We're talking about adults. So if it's either excess weight, high cholesterol, high triglycerides, high blood sugar, high insulin, high blood pressure, heart problems, etc. Most people have some type of metabolic ailment. The older we get, the worse it's going to be. And it doesn't take much to really worsen the problem. It'll take 5-10 pounds and suddenly your blood sugar can skyrocket. And blood sugar is kind of a symptom of the disease. The true factor is insulin, and you may be living with very high insulin for a long time. Why? Well, because we basically eat carbs. The more carbs you eat, the more you're going to stimulate insulin. There is a correlation between all these diseases and cancer. I believe it's the same disease, just different symptoms, but it's the same disease. It's insulin. So I would like you to give us an example of, in these difficult times of COVID-19, where you're restricted to going to your supermarket, uh, how many times you can go, and then what you can actually find available. What do you do? Or what do you tell your patients? Or what do you recommend? Buy this, don't buy that, stay away from these, get these.
Well, just to make one sentence comment, you're absolutely right. The issue with cancer and autoimmune disease is that sugar, glucose, carbohydrates is a pro-inflammatory molecule. It causes inflammation in the body, real biochemical inflammation, and inflammation is the trigger for a lot of cancers and a lot of autoimmune disease. A ketogenic diet where you're burning fat and protein is anti-inflammatory. And that's why it's so useful in fighting COVID. So the first thing is this: if you know you have that metabolic syndrome, if you're not under lockdown, you're in your house. So your house is your fortress of solitude. If there is crystal meth in your house, it is not there for decoration. If there's fruit on your counter, if there's cake in your fridge, if there's ice cream in your fridge, it is not there to look pretty. You will consume it to your own deficit. So the first thing is, get rid of the crystal meth from your house. Flush it down the toilet, throw it away. Just like if you're a smoker, if there's cigarettes in your house, you are going to smoke them, even if you've committed to quit. And it's sometimes difficult with other people in the house. Figure out how you are going to protect you from yourself. But once you remove those carbohydrates, now you're leaving two massive deficits in your life. You're leaving a nutritional deficit, what should I eat? But more importantly, you're leaving an emotion management deficit in your life. So every single day, if you can consciously force yourself to do something physically active, it doesn't matter how strenuous, to do something creative. I don't care if you're out in your garden, if you're putting on music, if you're cooking, if you're sculpting, painting, reading, writing, photography, do something creative. Have a spiritual connection. And spirituality is not about going to church or a religious institution. It's about the connection you have with your higher power or a meditative event. Have an empathetic human connection where you can talk about things that you're a little bit ashamed of, where you can be vulnerable. Why? Because it is connecting with the issues in your life that drive your emotions that is the single best way to deal with your emotional needs. If you can connect with and process the stuff that is causing the emotional tension, you no longer need sugar and starch or crystal meth to obliterate those feelings. So just like any addict, pour the booze down the toilet, crumple up the cigarettes, throw them away, get rid of the carbohydrates, and then replace them with a more effective emotion management strategy that you force yourself to do until it becomes inherent in your pathway of life. Now, let's look at the eating deficit. So if you remove carbohydrates and they're 80% of what you're eating, what the devil should you eat? So you can choose whether you want to be plant-based or whether you want to be carnivore-based or a mixture. I tend more toward the carnivorous side, and I would suggest that primarily because it's so much easier. And so I'm going to start with mostly a carnivore diet, which is eggs, cheese, any meats, any poultry, any seafood, any fish. Now, obviously, if you're a Muslim or a Jew, you're not going to eat the pork. If you have a fish allergy, you're going to stay away from the fish. That's fine. But there are no carbohydrates in animal products. And if you want to know how much carbohydrate to eat, the simple way to do it is just say, okay, instead of carbohydrates, if I'm an alcoholic, how much alcohol can I drink? And obviously the answer is zero. So the goal here is to eat as close to zero carbohydrates as you possibly can. And animal products have zero carbohydrates. And primarily when you're dealing with most of the diabetic type diseases, the non-obesogenic diseases, the closer to carnivore you can get, the easier it is to resolve those diseases. And the other thing that happens when you're carnivore is you automatically reduce the frequency with which you eat, because fat, saturated fat, is the molecule that mediates satiety. It makes us feel full quickly, so you're eating less but still feeling full, and it keeps you full for a long period of time. And the value there is not only are you developing ketosis, which solves diabetes, type 2 diabetes, you're also doing something that a buddy of mine, Jason Fung, is kind of the top guy of, which is intermittent fasting. But I'm not intentionally intermittent fasting. I'm just not eating. Why? Because I'm not hungry. I have not eaten yet today. I was up at 5 o'clock this morning. I won't eat until about 9 or 10 o'clock tonight. But the important thing is this: I'm not doing that intentionally. I'm doing that because I'm not hungry. I've got my little snack here. It's just pure black coffee, which I sip on throughout the day. That is my crystal meth. But when I was fat, that was a Coke and M&Ms. Now my coffee has no calories, but it's my little mind cleansing moment. And I've structured my day to be busy, to have my coffee and go through the day without drugs. So the carnivore diet is the easiest way to go, but there is no crime to eating vegetables. So but the crime is there are, to my mind, the drugs are any grains. And I don't care if it's couscous or corn or wheat. I don't care what it is.
even if it sounds sexy, right? Yeah. They invent new names.
It's like ecstasy is a designer drug. It's still a drug. I don't care how you design it. It's still that drug. So the first one is get rid of the grains. The second one is potatoes and rice. Now, but what about beans? What about veg? I've never, ever met a fat person who had a rough day and pigged out on broccoli. I've never met a fat person who rushed to the fridge after a long day and pigged out on cauliflower or even beans. We don't sit there with a pile of beans and wolf them down. Now, if they're mixed with rice, different story. Just like I've never seen someone who overdrinks water. But if you mix it with whiskey, I've seen people drink it too much. So the issue is not the water, the issue is the whiskey. The issue is the addictive carbohydrates. So we eliminate fruit, all fruit. But what about berries? The keto people say, if you fly on an airplane and you're an alcoholic and you love to drink a big bottle of vodka, and they now give you the little bottle of vodka, and you're an alcoholic, it's no different than eating berries instead of fruit. It's the same thing. Berries are just baby fruits, okay? Stay the hell away from them, because it's not just about what you eat. It's about how you eat and why you eat. And the same thing applies to what we call keto lookalikes. I don't care what the hell you make your brownie out of. You are not eating a keto brownie for its nutritional value. You're not drinking a protein shake or throwing fat in your coffee and calling it keto coffee, which is really a snack. You're not doing that for the nutritional benefit. You're doing it for this. And where should you get your ketone bodies from? You shouldn't get them from sticking fat or MCT oil in a coffee. You should get them from your own belly. Exactly. Now, if you look like an Olsen twin, by all means, go ahead and put fat in your coffee because you need some, you don't have your own. But my patient population doesn't have that problem. And what you want to do is to be in ketosis because you're not eating carbohydrates, not because you're overloading on fat. You want to fat fortify just a little bit. So whether you're eating a salad, whether you're eating vegetables, or whether you're eating a steak, you want a little bit of fat in there, whether it's butter or bacon or cheese or eggs or olive oil. I don't care what the source of that saturated or monounsaturated fat is. You want to fat fortify the food so that you get an early signal from your belly to your brain, triggered by a chemical called fat that says, dude, you're full, and you automatically down tools and you are done. And you eat less, but the difference between eating less in a ketogenic way, where you eat until you're stuffed, versus some diet of caloric restriction, is that satiety, feeling full, mediates the endpoint, not some preordained portion control that leaves you hungry in a few minutes. And the beauty about the human body, it is counterproductive for the human body to make you fat from food. So you won't be. And a well-formulated ketogenic addiction way of life, incorporating intermittent fasting, incorporating fat fortification, being mostly carnivore and occasionally eating some vegetables, is the ideal human diet. That's how our genes best respond.
We're the only animals that become diabetic in nature. We're the only animals that become obese in nature. And then I've got my patient.
Let me correct you. Yeah. We can make cows diabetic by putting them in feedlots and feeding them grain.
Exactly.
No mammal is immune to diabetes. Because
Exactly.
what cows do when they eat vegetables is they have bacteria in their stomach that convert the cellulose into sugar and then into fat. So what the cow is actually absorbing is fatty acids, not sugar, from its intestine. Human beings have lost the capacity to ferment vegetables in our intestine. So they have a micronutrient value, but they do not have a macronutrient value. Now, if you make a vegetable smoothie, or you puree it, or you ferment it and you eat kimchi, of course you're extracting the sugar. That's why all these juicing fads are so ludicrous. I love the juicing because it makes patience for me. It's job protection. So go ahead and juice away.
Well, you stole the words right out of my mouth, because my patient said, well, I have a diabetic dog. Yeah, but you're feeding it. In nature, animals feed themselves. Now, if you're going to eat something, don't eat somebody who's obese and diabetic and has heart disease. You just said it, Robert. It's either a person or a cow. If you have a cow that's not just being lot fed, etc., it's going to have the same diseases that you're going to get once you get the same mediators that cause the disease. I always tell somebody who wants to get into this therapeutic carb restriction, and it's a therapeutic way of life. It's a lifestyle. It's TCR. Eat leafy greens and vegetables that grow above ground. That way, they're not asking me an hour, but what about this? What about that? What about beans? What about lentils? It's like leafy greens and vegetables that grow above ground, no roots, keeping away from the starches. And then protein. Animal protein is wonderful for you, especially you and me, that we go out and have a huge piece of steak, a nice tomahawk, a lot of fat on it. Animal fat is spectacular. Saturated fat is wonderful. And eat all the fats. Keep away from vegetable oils and manufactured fats, especially the vegetables oils that, when you look at them in the chemical process that it takes for it to extract a gray sludge and convert it into a crystalline oil, it's like hell knows what happens inside our bodies, but there's a lot of studies now pointing towards small little particles that are the ones that are causing the inflammation in the arterial intima. We're almost out of time, but this is incredible. If you were to wrap it up again, just give me the 3 pointers people need to be looking out, because you actually mentioned it. COVID-19 is going to hit you if you have your immune system is not optimal. If you have metabolic disease, which most of us do at some point or another, you are metabolically unfit. Thus, your immune system could improve.
Yeah, I think the key thing about COVID, when they talk about old age, when they talk about heart disease, when they talk about obesity or BMI, when they talk about diabetes, those are markers of a problem. But you're not going to get worse COVID all because you're fat. You're going to eat it because what made you fat is a highly inflammatory, immune suppressing drug called carbohydrates. And that's the issue. The root cause of all of those metabolic side effects is immunosuppression through chronic excessive carbohydrate consumption. You might as well be a transplant patient on steroids. It has the same effect. It is because your body is so busy fighting the inflammation that is caused by those carbohydrates, it is distracted and it's not able to fight the COVID virus effectively. And in addition, COVID virus comes into what's called almost like a war zone. When it gets into the lower lungs of someone who's got an inflammatory process going on, it's like walking into a war zone where all the police are distracted fighting the war. Well, COVID says, dudes, let's go off and procreate, and it causes havoc in your lungs. The single best protection you can have for COVID disease is, number one, not to get it. But if you do get it, the single best protection you can have is an intact, healthy immune system. And that is a ketogenic diet, a diet where you are using fat as a fuel source, not sugar. Even if you're still fat, you can get into ketosis and become fat adapted and lower your insulin resistance very, very readily. It takes a long time to lose weight, but all because you're losing weight, it doesn't mean you're not in ketosis. So even if you've had a quintuple bypass, you can still correct that, not by taking a damn statin, which is probably, and I've done a podcast on this, probably increasing your comorbid risk because it lowers your fat, and fat is, LDL is something we use to fight inflammation in the blood vessel system, but by coming off the carbohydrates. But we can talk ad nauseum about that. The best weapon for all the diseases that we really are looking at that are self-induced is to stop doing drugs, whether it's nicotine, whether it's excessive alcohol consumption, whether it's opioids, and the most common addiction in this country is carbohydrates. So while everyone's focused on flattening the COVID disease, an insulin-resistant person dies in America every 7 minutes. We lose somebody to carbohydrate drug addiction. That is the curve we need to flatten. That is the curve. When this COVID thing is gone, that is the curve we need to flatten, because that curve is basically going straight into the stratosphere. 2 to 5 year olds are the most rapidly growing obese population.
That was awesome, man. That's a curve we all want to flatten. There's some of us in the scientific world that have done or walked into this therapeutic carb restriction because we needed it ourselves. You were explaining that I did too. My blood sugars were creeping up. I have no hereditary traits in my family. And suddenly I said, I can't be a diabetic. What am I going to do? And we started researching, and that's how we ended up learning that the carb is the killer. Where can people find you, Rob?
Thanks so much. So in terms of consultations, and it's not just about surgery, it includes surgery, but if you want to learn more about how to transform your life from an addiction perspective, send us a text anywhere from the US now. It's 561-517-0642. And send us a text and we can set up a consult, usually covered by your insurance. The other way to find me is I'm on YouTube. Everything we've talked about is in detail in literally close to 100 now YouTube videos. And go to YouTube. My channel is Carb Addiction Doc. Carb Addiction Doc. I'm also on Instagram. We post on that. And I love interaction. If you disagree with what I've said, if you want to know more about what I've said, look me up. I'm also on Facebook at jsapa.com or under my name, Robert Cywes, Cywes. But we're on social media, and I interact pretty readily on social media. So hit me up.
Beautiful. Robert, I'd like to have you again with another topic. Probably let's talk a little bit about the cholesterol lie, the cholesterol myth.
I'd love to talk cholesterol. The other one we can talk about is Alzheimer's and autism. So because they all have similar root causes, but I'd love to talk about that some more.
Wonderful.
What you're doing here is absolutely wonderful and so necessary for us. And I take my hats off to you because you've got a great model, and yet you've gone out and done this on top of that. That is really someone who cares about their patients. And thank you very, very much for being my friend and for what you do.
Oh man, I appreciate it so much. I'm heartfelt, dude. So we're definitely going to invite you back again. And in the meantime, what we're going to do is we're going to put all the information you gave us under the video once it goes established on Facebook and on YouTube and all our social media. And I want to remind everybody, tomorrow we have Dr. Ben Bocchicchio stay-at-home exercise program. He's going to teach us how to do 15 minutes twice a week from flab to fit. And this is actually a real deal. This guy is an incredible physician, a great researcher, and he's got a proven program that actually works. So there's no excuse. If you're staying home, you really can stay healthy. Rob, thanks for being here. We're going to see you again soon. My best to the family, and thank you all for watching. Please remember, there's tomorrow Ben Bocchicchio, and please share it on all your social media feeds. Thank you for watching. Till next time.